both, thank you, both the Hudson River Project and the Meadowlands Project in New Jersey were awarded their dollars from the federal government, and it's so exciting to see them being implemented. Recently, we released a walking tour of Hoboken's resilient parks that were created as a result of the Hurricane Sandy design competition. And if you haven't been there, really, really encourage you to go and check it out. They have been able to reduce flooding from stormwater 88%. And if you let me know when you're going, I will try and meet you there and take you around because I think it is a really world-class example. And what we're going to talk to you about today is something that, you're also very familiar with, and that is the fact that across the United States, no matter where you are living, you are experiencing extreme weather events and most likely have also experienced a federal disaster declaration. Between 2011 and 2024, 95.5% of counties faced at least one disaster declaration for an extreme weather event. So we are all in this together. And we recently launched our Atlas of Accountability, where you can actually put in your address or click around to the county that you live in New Jersey, and it will pop up and it will tell you exactly how many disaster declarations you and your neighbors have experienced, where the dollars came from, where they went, and it connects to a New Jersey report that has a lot more information. And what we found was that New Jersey has had 14 federal disaster declarations during that time, which is ranked 5th for the highest per capita of FEMA support. There's almost $8 billion in federal post-disaster assistance that has gone to the state of New Jersey. Every county has had at least 5 major disaster declarations, and 50% of counties have had at least 7, with Morris County being the highest. And this is what it looks like on the left hand of your screen of distribution of disaster declarations. And you can see that it's not just a shore issue, it is a riverine issue. And you know that if you're living in some of those communities. You can see on the right-hand side where FEMA's federal disaster assistance has gone. The social vulnerability index for the entire state, along with the energy reliability index for the entire state. And the energy reliability is very low for the state, the darkest meaning that it would take the longest for energy to come back on after an outage. On the left-hand side, the heat vulnerability index, which usually connects very much or an overlay with urban areas. And the right-hand side, active Superfunds, which is very important because when you have a Superfund site, obviously it's a toxic site. And when there's flooding, the floodwaters pick up anything that's on the ground and move it into homes and businesses and playgrounds. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Joanna, to introduce to you the report that we're talking about today.
Thanks, Amy, and afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to share this new research that Rebuild released this past week that takes an even closer look at the impacts due to flooding, particularly the risks to property and households and the subsequent implications for the state's property tax revenue as well. So our goal in this analysis is to identify which communities face the highest risks due to flooding and have the fewest resources to adapt. So we did analysis that looked at parcel level data to understand how flooding could impact people, property, and public budgets across New Jersey. And that looks at all 3.4 million parcels in New Jersey, from commercial, residential, for looking at their flood risk, and then also looking at for each of those parcels, the property value and the household income, and comparing under 2 scenarios, the current 2025 flood scenarios, as well as 2050 flood projections. And that looks at coastal as well as riverine flooding. Next slide, please. And what we found from this analysis is that 1.3 million people currently live in areas that will be in high flood risk by 2050. So now let's look at 2024 and our current population living in these areas. 624,000 people live in high flood risk areas today, and close to $280 billion in property value are accounted for in those areas with high flood risk. And that accounts for $3.2 billion in property taxes. By 2050, if we do not mitigate these flood actions, so this is say if we don't do anything, we anticipate that 1.3 million people are currently living in areas that would have that high risk by 2050. And that accounts for 435.9 billion in property value that could be at risk of flooding, and 5.9 billion in property taxes. So that's thinking about all the revenue that we have that goes towards schools and fire departments, your police department. There's a tremendous amount of revenue that's at risk here. Compounding that issue, we also found that areas that had really high flood risk are also the areas where we're seeing the greatest rates and growth in non-renewal of homeowners insurance. So a lot of these places are actually experiencing a compounding effect of both the fiscal risk and then also these financial risk and loss of a financial safety net. Next slide, please. So the way we broke down this data is by categorizing each of the parcels into one of 4 categories named crisis, emigrating, destination, and stable. So the crisis parcels are those that are high flood risk and lower income. The emigrating ones are high flood risk and higher income, so they might actually have resources and choose to move on their own timeline. And then the destination locations are places that are low flood risk and lower income. So they might actually see people moving into these areas as they're maybe more affordable. And then the stable locations are those that are low flood risk and higher income. So they're less likely to see as much of movement of people in or out. Next slide, please. So looking at just these areas that are at a risk of potential displacement, either from flooding or from the movement of people into these areas, we can see that there's about 1.3 million people who are in high risk. So they're either crisis or they are emigrating. About half of that population is lower income, meaning they probably won't have the resources to relocate without some sort of government intervention. And then an additional 3.7 million people. So in total, this crisis, emigrating, and destination categories give us a snapshot of who might be at risk of experiencing the pressures of displacement from flooding or from populations moving in and putting increasing pressure on an already really critical or tight housing market. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate, the crisis and the emigrating, these are the places that would have that primary displacement from the risk. And then next slide, the destination is where there might be a secondary displacement from populations moving in and adding pressure to the housing market. So you can see that we've mapped this for every single county so that you can understand those displacement risks and the number of people living in those areas. And I'll take you through in a few moments how to look at this data on our dashboard on our website. Next slide. And here we have just broken down, you can actually see the distribution of these different populations across the state. And what's really interesting is it's very clear that the risk of displacement, it's not just a coastal issue. It really stretches every corner of the state, that we can begin to identify areas that may be of highest priority from that primary and secondary displacement. Next slide. And just to go with this, so we are currently and we've created now a set of county-specific fact sheets. So this looks at if you want to be able to zoom in on a specific county and see the parcels as they're broken down by each of the 4 categories. You can understand the more localized risk in those areas, and all of these are available on our website to look at as well. And finally, with this information, we are calling on the state of New Jersey to fund resilient infrastructure to make communities safer. When we talk about the risk of displacement, we need to reiterate that that's without intervention. So that means there can be a with intervention. that results in numbers incredibly lower than what we're talking about in this analysis. So we want to see the state create a dedicated state funding source, such as a bond act or an insurance surcharge, to prepare for flooding, storm damage, and rising insurance costs. And also to help families move away from risk by growing programs and helping to fund programs like Blue Acres, or which helps families leave high flood risk zones, or Green Acres, which helps to restore floodplains through strategic land acquisition and restoration. And then finally, to be ready for short and long-term migration by developing statewide strategies to support displaced residents with housing, jobs, schools, identifying places that are in lower risk communities for them to move to. So with that, we're actually going to jump over to the tool on our website so that you can see exactly how you can find this information, and navigate to county specific data. So here you'll find, if you go to our Rebuild by Design's website and look up New Jersey flood risk, you'll see the entire map. And here you can also connect to other New Jersey related events that Rebuild is hosting, which will include upcoming event related to this displacement report. But we also find all of the detailed findings from our analysis. You'll find the county by county fact sheets, which I just mentioned, and then a breakdown of this analysis. So if you are looking for the overarching statewide data, you can find that here, as well as a statewide fact sheet, which you can also use and print out, and we encourage sharing. But then my personal favorite part of this analysis is that you can sort these tables on our website so that you can look at specific counties and identify those with the lowest risk or the highest risk. So here we're looking at where there are the breakdown of the parcels with a high flood risk in 2024 and then 2050. And you can sort all of these columns by lowest and highest risk. And then you can look at the jumped over it. And then you can look at the county by county breakdown for the displacement risk and vulnerable populations. And here's where you can see the number of people living in each county and how that adds up to give us the crisis population or emigrating population, destination, and stable. You can also see the totals at the bottom. So if you want to get that statewide snapshot as well, you can get that there. And then going over to the financial risk that we analyzed here, you can look at the current 2024 market value of all the properties that have are in areas with high flood risk, as well as the current property tax value of those parcels in high flood risk. And then you can also look at the 2050 potential risk in market value and property taxes. I want to note that we're looking at the 2050 risk, though this is in today's value. So this does not account for inflation. This is just looking at today's value, and then we encompass what that 2050 flood zone area could look like, to give a sense of the magnitude of what could be at risk. And this too, you can also sort each of these columns by highest, lowest. And then finally, the last feature that you can take a look at here is the non-renewal rates. This is using data from a Senate Budget Committee analysis of homeowners insurance non-renewal that came out recently. And we looked specifically at the counties in New Jersey. So here you can hover over this tool to find the specific county and understand the non-renewal increases or trend that's occurring across these counties. And finally, if you're curious, you can also check out and explore the methodology in greater detail by clicking on each of these buttons and see our recommendations. And then the last thing I'll just plug here while we're on here is our upcoming event with New Jersey organizer Amanda Devecca Rainier to talk about buyouts, displacement risk, this analysis, and the challenges around disaster recovery in New Jersey that's coming up on June 12th. We hope you'll join us for that as well.
Again,
So if anybody has questions, please put it in the chat. I'm happy to take them now. We have a question about the about the emigrating communities, whether or not it assumes that current New Jersey residents will be relocating within the state or outside of the state. And it actually doesn't assume either. What it does is what it does is it like calls to attention that New Jersey has a very, very low vacancy rate. And if people do not have infrastructure that lowers their risk, or if they do not have housing options to move to, then there's going to be a huge pressure on the market, which is going to force people to move out of state and to take their tax dollars with them.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, we know that we're looking at a snapshot of the state, and of course, there's a bigger conversation to have. We did a similar analysis for New York City a few years ago and looked specifically at the displacement that could happen in New York City, but also understand that many people from New York City may be looking to New Jersey and adding additional pressure. I already hear that from neighbors talking. And so there's, of course, a regional discussion to be had. But we do know that a lot of people do tend to want to move to locations where they can keep some sense of cultural continuity or continuity of religious institution or school. And so we tend to see that people, if they are sort of that emigrating population or moving with their with their own resources, tend to move actually pretty close to where they currently are.
Or it's kind of like also depends on their time of life. So they're definitely want to move close if their kids are in school, they're younger, but sometimes people wait to move until their kids go to college and then they move out of state. We've seen both of that. And maybe while we're answering some questions, Joanna, maybe you can find the link that we have for the report that we recently put out that was advising New York State in how to put together a relocation program and all the best practices from around the country. We worked with a number of different experts. It was super interesting. We learned a ton, and we're now teaching it to the state and to other states. We do have a question about the Blue Acres buyouts on the New Jersey coast, and I'm sorry, we're not experts in that, so we can't help you. But if you want to direct your question to NJDEP, I'm sure they can answer it for you. And the question we have in the chat. So please, if you can, put the question in the Q&A. So we're just looking at one place, but in the chat, I see that we have a question about the risk assessments accounting for the proposed mitigation measures in the NJDEP PAC real rules. It actually does not, because what this analysis does is it says without intervention, this is what's going to happen. And we know that there are lots of projects that are happening all around the state that will help communities, but we also know a lot of those projects are being cut right now by the federal government and do not know what we can count on and what we can't count on. So we are just showing what the data shows of without intervention, this is the risk to New Jersey. Oh, and one note also about the property tax is that it's a bit of an underestimation because it's only looking at state property tax. Obviously, municipalities get additional property tax, counties and towns and cities, but that was not calculated. It was, quite hard to do across the board. So we just took the state property tax. So that number is actually quite a bit higher, bigger impacts through all different types of municipal services. Do we have any more questions? Is there anything you'd like to see next? We are doing a ton of data analysis and it's teaching us a lot about the places that we're working. And if you do have any good ideas of what's next, please feel free to drop us in the chat or send us an email. You can always find us at info@rebuildbydesign.org.
I see a question about how people can get involved with the work that we're doing. And I would definitely say you should sign up for our New Jersey event series, so you can hear our monthly discussions about um, all sorts of topics from flood infrastructure, green infrastructure, what the state's been doing, and then also we'll have upcoming conversations. I mentioned with Amanda Devecca Rainier, and we'll continue to have these important conversations over the next month. But we also want to work with you if you are interested in helping New Jersey adapt to flood impacts. And if you want to collaborate with us in any way about identifying solutions to reducing risk and funding the solutions that we need in the state, please work with us. Thank you. I think Hannah just dropped the link in the chat, and you can definitely sign up to get involved on our webpage.